All right. Hey guys, let's go ahead, jump right in to our Unit 13, Coordination and Response. Now, when we look at coordination and response, we are talking about our nervous system and nervous control in humans. So really fun chapter, but it's fairly long. So let's get right into it for this first section, nervous control in humans. And the first thing we need to talk about is our nervous system in general. The human nervous system consists of the central nervous system, abbreviated as CNS, and the peripheral nervous system, abbreviated as PNS. Now, when we talk about the central nervous system, we are talking about the brain and the spinal cord that runs down your back, that's protected by all those vertebrae in your back. The peripheral nervous system is dealing with any and all of the nerves that extend from the central nervous system all throughout the body. Now, what our nervous system does is just simply allow us to respond and coordinate and regulate to all of our surroundings based on bodily functions to keep you and I alive. Okay, certain parts of our nervous system has adapted to be better at keeping us alive than as far as what part we are talking about and how we need to be able to sense things around us and sense danger, sense things that are hot or cold. All of that works together ultimately to keep me and you alive. And then you have things that just happen involuntarily, which would be like breathing and your heart beating, hormones being released, insulin being released into your bloodstream to monitor your glucose levels. All these things work together to keep us in homeostasis, to keep us in balance, and your body just does them. So those things we'll talk about in just a little bit too. But ultimately, we need to cover what specialized type of cell are we dealing with in our nervous system, and this is going to be something called the neuron. The neuron is what's going to have information sent down it through nerve impulses in the form of electrical signals that pass along these neurons to ultimately get messages to and from where they need to go for your body to respond. A bundle of neurons is what we call a nerve. And many of you have heard people saying, maybe they have nerve damage or you're getting on my nerves. This is what we're discussing, that it's a bundle of neurons. Okay. Now, when we're looking at, to give you a visual of the nervous system, so like I said earlier, that central nervous system is going to be the brain and the spinal cord, and then everything extending off of that in the form of nerves would be your peripheral nervous system. Okay. Now, another depiction that might be helpful for you is a bundle of neurons is what we call a nerve. And here is an image of a typical neuron cell. Now we have 3 of these, or different forms of neurons, which we'll talk about in just a second, but here is just an image of a basic neuron. Okay, so looking at the types of neurons, 3 main types that you'll be responsible for understanding what each of them do. We have sensory, relay, and motor neurons. Sensory neurons carry impulses from our sense organs to the central nervous system. So when you think of our senses, we can see, we can smell, taste, we can feel, and we can hear, okay? Now, all of those organs are packed with sensory neurons. So we can sense and detect what's going on around us, the stimuli around us. I can see color. I can smell when someone has cooked an amazing meal in my house. I guess that would probably be me because I'm the person that cooks in our house for the most part. I can taste that amazing meal. I can hear my kids screaming at me, wanting me to change the television channel, right? All of these things work together with receptors that are in our sensory, in the form of sensory neurons. Okay, relay neurons are found inside the central nervous system and connect in between sensory and motor neurons. They're the relay man, so to speak. And we'll look at a diagram to help you understand that better. And motor neurons carry impulses from the central nervous system to effectors, which are our muscles and glands. So if I'm telling my body to move, okay, I had to have a motor neuron involved with how I wanted to move my body and tell its effector, the muscle, like, the muscles in my arm, telling my arm to go up and down, all right, to move. Muscles and glands are your effectors. Now, when we look at each of these, let's go ahead and look at the diagram that you'll be responsible for labeling. On a basic neuron, we have the cell body that contains most of our cellular structures. And then this long tail is what we call the axon. The axon is surrounded by ultimately swan cells that form the myelin sheath. So it's like a protective layer over that axon, and it's this yellow color here in your image. And this is going to coat the axon. And then towards the end of your axon, you have the dendrites, which are almost like finger-like projections. And they're the nerve endings. So when you have a nerve impulse, it's actually carried down these neurons, and it jumps in between the gaps of the myelin sheath. And then there's going to be actually a space in between the next neuron, and that impulse is going to electrically jump to the next one. It's really cool how our body works in that way, okay? The next images are going to show you these 3 types of neurons that I just explained. For your sensory neurons, it's important to note they have endings of receptor cells. So that's what I was talking about when I said, you can see color and you can smell really yummy food, or you can taste really yummy food, or hear someone or feel someone touch you. All of your sense organs are filled with receptor cells at the ends of your sensory neuron. They have the axon covered with the myelin sheath made of swan cells. And then the cell bodies are kind of here in the middle of that neuron, and then it continues down into your dendrites that are then going to pass on that electrical impulse. The relay neurons are the middleman. They relay. So if you're into track or field, you kind of understand that concept, but it relays something. It passes it on. So they have large dendrites with the cell body and axon, and then followed by more dendrites to carry on that message. And then finally, your motor neuron. Your motor neuron would be the one that we typically see the most if we're talking about nerve cells or neurons. This is the image that you see most often, but it's got the cell body at one end, followed by the axon, and then the dendrite projections are on either end of that as well. Okay, when we look at voluntary and involuntary responses, discussed it a little bit earlier, but just make sure you understand that voluntary is like your conscious decision to carry out that action. Like you want to throw a piece of paper in class that you're not supposed to throw. You had to voluntarily make that decision, although it wasn't a great decision, to take the paper and throw it, right? Involuntary, or just a reflex reaction, does not involve the brain as a coordinator. So where voluntary actions involve the brain, that's why we talk about, when you make a bad choice, like you had to think about it. Although you might have thought wrong, you thought about it. You used your brain. An involuntary reaction doesn't even require the use of our brains as the coordinator of the reaction. You're not aware that you've completed it until after you've carried it out. And these are things that are essential to our basic survival, and they're rapid. So whereas a voluntary response takes longer, or should take longer, depending on what you are doing voluntarily, that the response for an involuntary reaction, like breathing, your heart beating, hormones releasing, insulin releasing after you've eaten a sweet sugary meal, all of these things are involuntary for basic survival. Okay, this wraps it up. I know it's going to be a long unit, but it's going to be a great one. Go ahead, get your notes down, label your diagrams. We're going to have a ton of those for this unit. Move on to your CFU, your Ed puzzle, and then your short assignment for the day. Okay, you guys have done great. I'm proud of you, and I'll see you next time.